We've heard it said a few more times already this morning, but good morning. It's nice to be back in Oklahoma. We took a little tour of the world, as it were, or at least the pairing world, very safely. I would assure you of that. But and I was trying to think. First of all, I want to say thank you. A couple of different thank yous. We were out in Tennessee last week, and we were able to watch the service. So I'm reminded constantly of the work that John and Stephen and others are doing to make this possible to be shared. And I'm not sure if we just never really thought about it that way, but if we start thinking about the positives from 2020, which there really are some, believe it or not, this is one of them. The idea that we can still connect even though we're separate. So for those of you who are online, I always want to say that, hello TV Land. But we're glad that you're here, and I do want to say thank you to them. And I also want to say thank you to Hunter last week. He stole everything I was going to say today. No, he did a great job, and that's not true, that's not at all. But I appreciate your words for us, and I look forward to what's coming later as we continue to kind of work our way into this year. Because what I wanted to talk about, obviously, this is kind of an easy topic, if you will, is new. Because obviously with Tuesday, or Saturday, wow, I'm going to get it right in a minute. Friday being the New Year day, if you will, that we're kind of all probably thinking to ourselves, okay, we got new year. I know we were all kind of looking forward to 2020 being gone. We thought maybe that was where all the trouble was. And then, of course, the snow comes on New Year's Day. It's like, okay, it's not over with us yet. Things are going to happen. So, but to look back and say that 2020 was an eventful year, I think is probably putting it mildly. If I were to start asking around, can y'all please give me some positives that occurred in the year 2020? And I thought about some things this morning as I was kind of thinking, what are some positives? First of all, of course, we had our third grandchild. Darcy was born in June, and we were able to go visit with her and see her grow. And one of the things that's been a blessing for both of our new grandchildren over this past year is that Mom has gotten to stay home with them longer. And I know that many of mothers for this past year, that's been true. Now, the reason why is a little different, but face it, we're going to keep looking for those silver linings. I think a very positive for us, obviously, was Hunter and Aaron coming to us. So I look at that as a very positive thing for what we've been able to achieve, be able to do. And of course, Hunter and Aaron, I saw some pictures on her Facebook. She finally posted something from the wedding. That was nice to see that they get them be married. And I think that's been a wonderful thing. And I saw some pictures of snow and all that. It was just fantastic. So if I were to keep asking, we probably could say, yeah, well, there was that, and there was that, and there was that. And the truth of the matter is that as years progress, we can all kind of go, well, here's some bad things and here's some good things, and we lump them all together. But with obviously with the pandemic and the stress that's caused, it really has turned 2020 into a rather unique year. But I don't want to talk about 2020, I want to talk about 2021 and beyond. I want to talk about things that are new, but I do want to talk about things that are different, okay? Now, probably most of you already know this story, but I'm going to tell it again anyway. There was this a daughter who was in with her mother, and I guess it could be son, if you will, because it's just one of those kind of stories, but was in with her mother, and she was preparing for an evening meal. And she got this large roast out of the refrigerator and set it down, and took a knife and sliced it in two, and put it in two separate pans and put it in the oven. And the daughter was kind of thinking, that's kind of a strange thing. Why would you do that? And the daughter asked the mother, said, well, why would you cut it in half? Why is that important to do that? And the mother said, well, I don't know. That's what the way my mother always did it. She always cut it in two and put it in and it was always a great roast. So, okay. So the next time her mother was over, they asked her, said, hey, Grandma, can you tell me, please, why is it that you always cut your roast in half before you put it in the oven? And Grandma said, well, it's because my pan was too small back then, so I had to cut it in half so it would fit. That explanation had never been given to her, so she always thought that was the way to do it to make it taste good. But actually, it was just something that was done because you had to do it. But all of a sudden, a necessity became a tradition, became that's the way things are. And so then I just wonder to myself, and I know I like that story. I've always kind of enjoyed that story, but I think to myself, I wonder then, does the mother rethink it? Does she say to herself, wait a minute, I've got a pan big enough now, I can put the whole thing in there? And I kind of say that all to kind of get us to where we are today here, which is, how do we rethink how we do things? How do we rethink and how do we reimagine? And are we ready for something new to occur? And I want to talk about two individuals this morning who, two preachers, if you will, two men of God, who were pretty secure in how they believed things were. I mean, they had been raised in the church, at least the church as they understood it. They had been raised with a concept of here's how things are supposed to be. You know, you always cut that roast in half. You always do things this way. And then something occurred in their lives to shake the very foundations of what they were about. And I want to go into these stories for us this morning with the idea that how are we going to face and how are we going to proceed in the year 2021 as individuals and as a church, a congregation here in Westwood, because we have many things that we're going to have to talk about and deliberate about and to see moving forward. But we need to make sure that everybody is kind of on board with us with these things. And so the question is going to be, you know, how do you see these new things happening? And I chose this main verse today for a reason. I love the song, you know, the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. And I just wonder to myself sometimes, how many of us wake up thinking to myself, you know, God blesses me new today. God blesses me new today. And we look upon that new day as an opportunity to understand and to appreciate what God is doing for us. Okay, so my first individual is a guy who was very solid in his religious thinking. He was very solid in what he believed. And he knew that what he was doing was what God wanted him to do. He just knew it because he had been raised up, and I mean, he was grounded in Scripture. He was grounded in his understanding of what God was all about. And so anytime he saw something that was going to change the narrative, to change how things were, then it was going to be, at least in his mind, part of his job was to not let that happen. He was going to speak out, he was going to act to change the narrative, if you will. So we're going to be in the book of Acts, by the way. So if you have your Bible there, Acts chapter 9. And this first guy, of course, his name was Saul. Now, Saul is about to have the very basis of his life totally rocked. You know? And I think about when I was working with teenagers all the time, and we think about teenagers being very, you know, easy to change. They can make it. They don't do that very well at all. Imagine when you're 30 or 40 years old and you're solid, right? You're solid. You know what you believe. You know, you've been about what you've been about. This is how things are. This is how things are. I thought about some things that were different in my life over the past, 60 years that were not the same. And I told, I can't remember who I was talking to, but it was a couple of weeks ago. And I said, they were talking about all the different computer programming and all this kind of stuff that's happening. I said, well, let me explain to you. When I was in college, and we had a cafeteria that we ate at Fred Hardeman called Gato. We always call it Gago. But anyway, and you'd go in to get your food, and there was a long line to get to the food, right? We always saw, or at least I always saw, people with long boxes of little bitty cards. And they were sitting there looking at those cards and trying to replace them. Now, how many of y'all remember those days? All of you old computer programming people. Yeah, the old cards, right? Because when I was in college, you didn't have screens that you could type things into. We just barely got into word processing when I started getting out of school. I really missed that. You know, it was still typewriters. Remember typewriters? Remember Selectric typewriters, where you push the button, it would go back and erase them? See, most of you young ones like, what's that? Now it's just keyboarding, keyboarding. So anyway, life changes. And in our lifetime, of course, things change. Well, here's Saul, and he, like I say, he thinks to himself, I've got this licked. I understand. So see what happens here. I'm going to start reading in verse 1. Meanwhile, Saul was still breathing out murderous threats against the Lord's disciples. He went to the high priest and asked him for letters to the synagogues in Damascus, so that if he found out any there who belonged to the way, whether men or women, he might take them as prisoners to Jerusalem. And as he neared Damascus on his journey, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. And he fell to the ground and heard a voice say to him, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Who are you, Lord? Saul asked. I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. He replied, now get up and go into the city, and you'll be told what you must do. Now let's stop for just a minute and kind of get this picture here, okay? First of all, do we look at Saul as being a mean person? Do we look at Paul as being cruel? I read something yesterday and was listening to some stuff last night that said he was a cruel man. And I'm not sure he was cruel. He was just kind of set in his ways. He knew what he was about. He thought this is how things are supposed to be. And of course, what he was really dealing with was not, and we need to think about this, he was not dealing with the wide world. He was dealing with his world. He was dealing with the Jewish people who were being subjected to obviously some kind of heresy. They were being pulled away, and the way he saw it, this new thing that had come into place, was tearing his church apart. And so therefore he thought to himself, I've got to do something about this. And he was obviously a strong-willed individual, someone who had the ability to go ahead and take on to himself these projects, if you will. And it says he's breathing out murderous threats. Now that's pretty serious. And once again, let's think about who he's talking to. He's talking to Jewish individuals who have been raised in a Jewish way of life. And Fred did a nice job of talking about some of the things that the Jews were supposed to be about. And these people were being pulled away, the way Saul looked at it, because of this man named Jesus, who supposedly was a prophet of God and who had a following. And Saul saw this as something to be stamped out, to be gotten rid of. And so he had made it his mission to go and take care of these things in his church. And that's important, I think, that we start that way, because he wasn't talking about Gentiles yet. He wasn't talking about people outside the Jewish faith. He was talking about Jews who he saw as walking away from their correct way and going a different direction. And it was time to fix their problem. So he didn't have a problem. They had a problem. So he was working to fix their problem. And now he's going out of Jerusalem because, of course, the persecution that had taken place after Stephen was stoned had sent a lot of the disciples out away from Jerusalem. They were heading out into the country. And so you had these people, these disciples who were preaching the gospel about Jesus, were starting to infiltrate the Jewish land outside. And so it was time, Saul's thinking, it's time to take care of this. So he gets permission from the leaders there in Jerusalem. I'm going to head to Damascus, he says. And I'm going to take care, because in other words, we've heard some bad things about happening up there. That's why he's going. There are some people in Damascus who are doing bad things. They are following this man, Jesus. How dare they do that? Now, and maybe it's just me, but I've always believed that God has a weird sense of humor. He picks people, he chooses people that we wouldn't necessarily choose. When he picked David, was he the oldest and the best looking and all that kind of stuff to be the king? No. He was like the little runt kid. When God chooses, sometimes I think it's a little strange sense of humor. So here is this man, Saul, who is so devout to God, he thinks, that he's trying to stamp out this way. He's trying to stamp out this light of Jesus. And he's on the road here, and he gets a visitation from, guess who? The very man he's trying to get rid of. He even asked the question, who are you, Lord? I am Jesus, whom you persecute. Now get up and go into the city, and you'll be told what you must do. And I kind of think, I read this to myself, and I think, what was Saul thinking at the moment? What was going through his mind? Because he had been so devoted to getting rid of this whole situation. He wanted this, well, it wasn't called Christianity yet, but he wanted this whole thing to go, this whole following of Jesus to be gotten rid of. And now he's confronted by the one he's trying to get rid of, and the guy says, hey, go to the city, I'll tell you what you got to do. I mean, Saul is shaken to his very core. I don't think it could have been any plainer for us to see that he was about to undergo a huge shift. But he doesn't even know how big a shift he's going to go through yet. Because right now it's just, oh, there's Jesus. You mean he's real? You mean this is not something that's just been made up? He's not just some fancy sort of person? No, he's real. And so he goes into the city, picking it back up in verse 7. The men traveling with Saul stood there speechless. They heard the sound but didn't see anyone. Saul got up from the ground, but when he opened his eyes, he could see nothing. He had been blinded by literally blinded by the light. He couldn't see anything, so they led him by the hand into Damascus. For 3 days he was blind. He did not drink or eat anything. And in Damascus there was a disciple named Ananias. The Lord called to him in a vision, Ananias. Yes, Lord, he answered. The Lord told him, go to the house of Judas on Straight Street and ask for a man from Tarsus named Saul, for he is praying. In a vision he has seen a man named Ananias come and place his hands on him to restore his sight. So Saul has been given more vision, you see. Saul knows that someone is coming to restore his sight, and probably someone's going to come and tell him what to do. Okay, you're Ananias. Okay? You're Ananias. You've heard of Saul. You know who this guy is. You know why he's come. You know what he's about. Maybe you've had friends who have been tortured, captured, maybe even put to death by him or at his commands. And now you've got God saying, go talk to Saul. I want you to put yourself in that place. Are you going to just jump up and go, yep, I'm out of here. I'm on my way. I'm heading to him. How many times do we see stories in the Bible where God calls someone and they go, yeah, I think I'm going to go the other way. Or, yeah, you picked the wrong person here. I don't think that's a good idea. But look what Ananias says. Lord, I have heard many reports about this man and all the harm he has done to your holy people in Jerusalem. And he has come here with authority from the chief priest to arrest all who call on your name. Once again, Jewish individuals who are subverting Judaism to the way. That's how he's looking at it. But God said to Ananias, go. Now listen real carefully here. I think it's important that we get the point here, okay? Saul has made it his mission to root out any kind of change in Judaism. He is so grounded in his faith, he is so grounded in his understanding of what God wants him to be about. And I'm sure we're talking about the Torah and the laws and the prophet, all those kind of things. He is so grounded that he wants to make sure that nothing outside of that is being heard about. And we're still talking about the Jewish people here. Now, one of the real tenets of the Jewish people, and it's important that we understand that, is that you don't really mix with people outside of the Jewish faith. You don't congregate together. Let's remember that whenever the priest wanted Jesus crucified and went to see Pilate, what did they make him do? They made him come out to see them because they didn't want to go into his house, because then they would be unclean, impure. I mean, I have a hard time kind of understanding that mentality that says, I can't even talk to someone because it makes me unclean. But Saul is one of those individuals who is so grounded in his Jewish faith, you see, that's going to be part of his belief system. I can't have anything to do with Gentiles, no. And we're not even talking about that yet, but I can't have anything to do with them. In fact, I am so grounded in my faith, I so believe what God is telling me that I'm going to go out and stamp out anything that will change that. But look what he said. Go, this man is my chosen instrument to proclaim my name to the Gentiles and their kings and to the people of Israel. Now, wait a minute. You're saying a man who is so dogmatic about his faith that he's trying his best to stamp out any little change in Judaism, and God, you want him to go and talk to the Gentiles? You want him to go and preach to those people? You know, those people. Anybody outside. Well, did I mention that Saul's world was about to be rocked? The very foundation of everything he believed in, to a point, was about to change. So, to say that something new was happening to Saul is putting it mildly. We know that Ananias comes and preaches to him, tells him the word, his sight is restored. And Saul, to his credit, makes the change. Makes the change. And understands that now I need to be preaching not against Jesus, but for Jesus. And more than that, I'm going to have to go preach to a people that I used to think were unclean. But wait a minute. Let's take a step back here a second. Because you see, the Gentiles, it hadn't been open to them yet. So now we have our second man, whose world is about to be rocked. Now, do y'all remember what happened on the day of Pentecost? And who stood up and proclaimed the word to all those Jews who were in Jerusalem, that Jesus was the Son of God, that they had crucified him, but if they would call on his name and believe and be baptized, they could be saved. Remember those stories? Who was that man? Peter. Peter was that man, and Peter was one of those, once again, grounded in his faith, understood how things were going to be. Even though he was a simple fisherman, he had now become in the forefront of the way. But as he understood it, the way still meant that it was only for Jewish people. Now, it's so easy for us to sit on this side of that story and go, well, that's kind of strange. But up until this point, the Gentiles hadn't been preached to. They weren't welcomed in. In other words, we're going to have to leave. None of y'all are here because you're not welcome. You're not welcome into God's church. At least that's the way they looked at it. So here we are in chapter 10, beginning in verse 9. And Peter's been at this for a while now. Peter's been doing his thing for a while, so much so, he's been doing such a good job with what he's been doing that Saul has had to try to defeat what Peter's been doing. Let's remember these two men, how they're working at odds with each other, really. But about noon the following day, as they were on their journey, on their journey and approaching the city, Peter went up on the roof to pray. He became hungry and wanted something to eat, makes sense. And while the meal was being prepared, he fell into a trance. He saw heaven open and something like a large sheet being let down to earth by its four corners. It contained all kinds of four-footed animals as well as reptiles and birds. Then a voice told him, "Get up, Peter, kill and eat." I kind of wonder if it's one of those, y'all ever watch those cooking channel, the guy eats the weird food? You ever seen those? You know, really, I mean, you think to yourself, ooh, I wouldn't want to try that. You know, that's just nasty. You know, I mean, fish coming out, little bitty, whatever they start, some of the weirdest things. And I think about that when I read this. I think, you know, was that what Peter was looking at? These animals? And he sees all these animals in a sheet, And the voice of heaven says, hey, get up and eat. Now, if I'm hungry, I might not say, nah, don't really want anything, you know? But Peter doesn't respond in the sense that I'm not hungry. He responds with what he knows from his upbringing, from what he understands from his teaching, which is, I can't eat that. That's unclean. I have been taught since my very early years not to eat certain animals because they are religiously unclean. That's what Peter's thinking. Well, I can't do that. I mean, I'm true to you, God. I'm true to what my understanding, even though I have started to preach a way that's different from strict Judaism, because Jesus is who I believe in, still, I'm going to follow certain aspects of strict Judaism, which is, I can't eat that. Now, y'all know what he says here, what the vision says to him. Do not call anything impure that God has made clean. No, wait a minute. What are you saying? Are you saying that it's possible what I've always believed is not necessarily true? Or that things have changed in some way? Is that possible? And according to this, it says it happened 3 times. 3 times Peter's is told, hey, go eat. I can't eat that, it's unclean. Don't call something impure that God has called clean. Now, once again, I don't know how you are with new things. I remember very well when VCRs came into existence. And what did we always, what's one of the jokes about VCRs? The flashing clock on there, because why? Because we didn't know how to set it. Some of you older individuals like me, do you get your children to look at your phone and fix things? Because you don't know how to do it? Or at least you never have been. We don't always handle new things very well. Now, those are simple ideas, little electronic things. What about a deep-seated concept? A deep-seated idea that is just a part of your very makeup, a part of your very DNA, like this story right here. Peter has been told all of his life, no, you can't do that. Peter has been told all of his life, you don't go to Gentiles. You don't go and speak to those people. You don't go into their houses. You are a people separate. If you go and associate with them, then you'll be unclean. You will be impure. You cannot approach God anymore because you're not clean anymore. Something's about to shift. Something's about to change in Peter's life. His very foundation is being rocked right here. And I don't think I'm sure it's on purpose, that this happens right after the story of Saul. Because who is Saul supposed to go and preach to? The very people that Peter is saying, I can't go talk to. But God is saying, it's okay. Don't do that. So in verse 17, while Peter was wondering about the meaning of the vision, the men sent by Cornelius found out where Simon's house was and stopped at the gate. Now Cornelius was this Gentile who was devout, and God had said, hey, send for Peter. Send for Peter. So they called out, asking if Simon, who was known as Peter, was staying there. And while Peter was still thinking about the vision, the Spirit said to him, Simon, 3 men are looking for you, so get up and go downstairs. Do not hesitate to go with them, for I have sent them. I know it's the stories in hindsight. Of course, it's all, you can't sit there and go, well, that was kind of a lucky instance. No, God had this planned out. God made this work. You got the vision. Peter's thinking about, what does that mean? What? People from who? Gentiles. And to Peter's credit, he almost connects the dot. He almost gets there. But to Peter's credit, he does what God tells him to do, which is go down and talk to him. And don't be afraid to go with him. Now, where's he going? He's going to a house of Gentiles. What's he going to do? He's going to preach the word. That's what he does. That's what he's been gifted with. That's what he's been assigned to by Jesus himself. You're going to give the what? What's he supposed to have? And maybe I think of this wrong, but the keys to the kingdom. He stands there on Pentecost and proclaims to the Jewish people, believe in Jesus, be baptized. And now there's one more door to be opened. There's one more gate to be unlocked. There's one more group of people that we need to let in, and it's those Gentiles. And Peter goes and preaches, and God blesses those people, and he sees it. Now I know that God is no respecter of persons. Would you call that something new for Peter? Would you call that something new for Saul? They have both been rocked to their very core, I believe. They have been charged with changing the way they think. Now, Peter, for the most part, still goes on and preaches to the Jews, but Saul makes a huge change in the world as they knew it. He gets away from preaching to just Jewish people. He starts preaching to Gentiles. Now, so far in the Bible, if you look very far, you know that our world that we read about is primarily Jewish in nature because we've been brought from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We got the kingdom of Israel. The Jewish people are formed, and we know the story about those people. But our story is about to change because our story is about to come into play. Now, I don't know about you, but my Jewish heritage is pretty much nil. I am what you would call, I think, a Gentile. My ancestors were Gentiles. So I read these two stories and I think to myself, because of what God did for these two men, I can stand here today. Many, many years later, I am a Gentile standing in the house of God proclaiming His word. And I look out here and I do not see unclean people, I do not see people who will make me unclean. I see people that Jesus has declared to be part of His family. And that's what Saul was going to go do. And he changed the world of so many people, but it had to start with him. It had to start with him being willing to take on something new. It had to start with Peter saying, you know, I guess I can look at this a different way. I can look at this as being new. Now, I don't know what kind of plans you've got for this year. I don't know if you've already thought to yourself, you know, I want to accomplish this, this, and this. But I hope in planning and thinking about it, at the very center, you've put God. And you're going to see what God can do in your life new every morning. Because God is waiting to bless you every morning. And they're not old blessings, they're new blessings. That's what we're told. Now, can you put that first slide back up, John? The scripture reading? It's going to go back a bit. Back to the scripture reading that Hunter read. Where is this found? Where is this found in the Bible? I'm pretty sure this word here means weeping and sorrow. When you lament something, you talk about what bad's happened. And I find it so, godlike. that in the midst of a book about sorrow and problems and anguish, because that's what Lamentations really were, it was a pouring out of grief. And he even says, remember my affliction, I remember all these kind of things, but in the midst of all of that sorrow, all of that weeping, the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end, but they are new every morning. And I hope as a congregation, as a church, that's what we're going to be about this year. Looking for new blessings every morning, because God is so desirous of blessing us daily. Now, what does that look like? We're going to discover that together. We're going to work on that together to see how we are blessed by God on a regular basis. I'm going to make a suggestion this morning, and I think you're going to get some more. But I'm trying to look at some things in 2021 to highlight our journey with God. And one of the things that I've decided to do, and I'm going to make some suggestions along the way, is I'm going to try to make some note cards. Now, some of y'all probably do this already. But I'm making a note card, and the first verse on that note card is going to be that one. And there's a place I look every morning. You know, where do you look every morning when you get up? Whatever that might be, and I'm going to tape it right to that. And I'm going to challenge us as a congregation to pick a verse every month so that by December you'll have at least 12 cards on that mirror or on that wall or wherever it is. And you've been looking them over every month. As a congregation, I want to challenge us to have verses that we can read constantly. Like I say, some of y'all already do this. Some of y'all have done this in the past, and I encourage us to do it again. You know, but one of the things I might ask is, well, how many verses? I might even ask the question, you know, hey, who's got a verse up? What does it say? What's your verse this month? My first verse is going to be this one. It's going to be that one that says that God's mercies never end, and they are new every morning. Because I guarantee you, there are some mornings when I get up, I'm going to go, I don't feel very blessed. You know, I don't feel very like mercy has been showered down upon me. And I want to be reminded. And you might think, well, you already know that. No, I want to see it. I want to read it. So that's one goal, if you will, one concept I'd like to lay on your hearts and on your minds this year, is to go ahead and start looking at verses and putting them up on the wall. So as you read them constantly, you know, commit them to memory, write them on your heart, and see what a difference that makes in your life. We're going to have some more coming up. Next week, we're going to start looking at some verses that Paul has given us about who we are and what we need to be about. And I'm looking forward to the journey that we're going to take together. But this morning, if you want to start a new journey, the first step is with Jesus, is with God. And he makes it so simple. Call on his name, proclaim your faith in him, be baptized, wash away those sins. Let's start new. Because that's the word, new. We get a chance every day to be new. Perhaps you just need to lay at God's feet some of these troubles, some of these struggles you've been about. Let's start laying more and more at God's feet, because he is desirous to give us blessings every day. Every day. If we can help you in some way as a congregation, as an eldership, would you come now as we stand and sing?